We are honored and delighted to be hosting the Governor of the Bank of Canada for this public address. Canadian clubs are here to help you learn more about this great country and dig deeper into issues that matter most to Canadians. This event is no exception. We have partnered with Canadian clubs from across the country, including our friends in Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal. And now I would like to introduce Anina McCuitt, incoming president of the Canadian Club Toronto and national leader of technology, media, telecom, and consumer markets at PwC.
Thanks, Heather, and hello, everyone. We're pleased that you can choose to watch today's event with simultaneous translation in French and English. La présente web diffusion est disponible en traduction simultanée et vous pouvez sélectionner la langue de votre choix. Voici les grandes lignes du déroulement de la web diffusion d'aujourd'hui. Le gouverneur fera une allocution d'une quinzaine de minutes, suivie d'un entretien conjoint avec le président du Canadian Club Toronto et journaliste d'affaires Bruce Sellery, et la présidente du Conseil du Cercle canadien du Montréal, Marie-Hélène Nollet, vice-présidente stratégie et soutien de programme, service conseil à la BDC. Le gouverneur répondra ensuite à vos questions. Pour ceux qui se sont inscrits à l'événement, vous pouvez écrire votre question dans la fenêtre à droite de la vidéo. Vous pouvez envoyer votre question en français ou en anglais et le gouverneur répondra au plus de questions possibles. Providing our thanks today is Susan Joliffe, co-chair of the Speakers Committee from the Canadian Club of Calgary. Before we begin, let me share a little bit more about the Governor. Tiff Macklem was recently appointed Governor of the Bank of Canada, effective June 3rd, 2020, for a term of 7 years. He first joined the Bank of Canada in 1984 and occupied increasingly senior positions until December 2004. During the global financial crisis, Mr. Macklem was Associate Deputy Minister at the Department of Finance, and he served as Canada's representative at the G7, G20, and Financial Stability Board. In July 2010, Mr. Macklem returned to the bank as Senior Deputy Governor. Prior to his appointment as Governor, Mr. Macklem was the Dean of the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. And during his time at Rotman, he was a frequent speaker on the topics of the global financial system, risk management, and public policy. And he also served as a director at Scotiabank and chair of its Board Risk Committee, and was a member of Ontario's Internal Audit Committee, the Asian Business Leaders Advisory Board, and the Advisory Board of Georgian Partners. He's previously chaired the Global Risk Institute and the Expert Panel on Sustainable Finance. Governor, the Canadian Club podium is now yours.
Well, Anita, Heather, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me. And good morning to everybody watching and listening. I am very pleased to be with you in my first public appearance as Governor of the Bank of Canada. The COVID-19 pandemic has upended many of our ways of doing things, including speaking in person to large groups. Fortunately, we can take advantage of technology, and I can speak to every Canadian club and Cercle Canadien and hear directly from your members right across the country. Thank you for the invitation. La COVID-19 est une tragédie humaine. Elle a provoqué un désastre économique sans précédent. Dans les secteurs entiers de l'économie ont été fermés. Déjà en avril, plus de 3 millions de personnes ont perdu leur emploi et 3,4 millions ont perdu plus de la moitié de leurs heures de travail. À cause de la pandémie, des millions de Canadiens sont dans une situation très difficile. Pour les décideurs économiques, c'est aussi une période difficile. Depuis une trentaine d'années, le Canada profite des bienfaits d'une politique monétaire basée sur des cibles d'inflation. Dans cette crise économique, la cible d'inflation était notre phare. Mais la faiblesse structurelle des taux d'intérêt et l'ampleur du choc de la pandémie changent notre façon d'appliquer notre cadre de politique monétaire. Before we get to the question and answer period, I want to talk about the essential ingredients of this framework and the ways the pandemic is affecting how we operate. I only have time to skim over some of these topics, so I'm hoping we can have a good discussion in the Q&A. Our monetary policy framework is designed to deliver low, stable, and predictable inflation. This is the best contribution we can make to Canada's economic welfare. That's because low, stable, and predictable inflation lays the foundation for sustainable economic growth. And keeping inflation near its target means the economy is running close to capacity with full employment. It's important to underline that our framework is set out in an agreement established with the government and renewed every 5 years. This sends an important signal that the democratically elected government and the bank agree on the policy goal. And it gives the bank the operational independence to pursue that goal. This enhances our credibility and gives Canadians more confidence that we will achieve the inflation target. And as I said, the inflation target is really a beacon to guide our policy. By grounding our actions in our framework, we will always be working toward bringing the economy near capacity with full employment. A successful inflation-targeting monetary policy framework has a number of core ingredients. Clearly, we need to agree on a measure of inflation to target. We need to assess how much demand there is in the economy relative to its productive capacity or supply. We need tools to influence demand or spending and bring it in line with supply. And we also need an outlook for the economy because it takes time for our tools to affect spending and inflation. And because there are many unknowns, we need an understanding of the risk to the outlook. These are the basic ingredients of inflation targeting. And COVID-19, combined with structurally low interest rates globally, is affecting all of them. Commençons par notre mesure d'inflation. La banque cible le taux de variation sur 12 mois de l'indice des prix à la consommation ou l'IPC. C'est la mesure la plus courante et la plus complète de l'inflation. Pour le taux d'inflation annuel, on vise 2%, soit le point médian d'une fourchette à 1 à 3%. Mais d'un mois à l'autre, l'IPC est parfois très volatile et son évolution peut s'éloigner de la tendance à long terme. Pourquoi? Parce que les prix de certains produits, par exemple les prix des fruits et légumes frais ou de l'essence, peuvent varier énormément. Pour mieux voir les tendances derrière l'évolution de l'inflation, il faut donc examiner plusieurs mesures de l'inflation fondamentale. Total CPI is weighted to reflect the buying patterns of the average Canadian household. In normal times, for example, Canadians spend a lot more on gasoline than they do on alcohol, so gasoline has a larger weight in the index. But these aren't normal times. Because of the pandemic, Canadians are spending much less on gasoline and air travel and more on things like food purchases in stores. And until very recently, we weren't spending anything on haircuts. Fortunately, here in Ottawa, you can now get a haircut, and lucky for all of us, I got one last week. But more seriously, the implication is that the CPI isn't fully reflecting people's current inflationary experience. Bank staff have been working with Statistics Canada to better understand the implications of these shifts in spending patterns. As the economy reopens, many of these shifts are going to unwind. What we'll be doing is we'll be working to look through the temporary shifts while capturing the more enduring changes. The pandemic has also greatly complicated supply and demand. To see how, let's first consider the economy's capacity to produce goods and services. At the outset of the pandemic, Canadians were subject to necessary and strict containment measures to slow the spread of coronavirus. Physical distancing practices and stay-at-home orders quickly made some types of work impossible. Most non-essential workplaces were closed, putting a stop to many jobs that can't be done remotely. This resulted in a massive decline in supply. Maintenant que le déconfinement a commencé, on voit un retour partiel de l'offre. Mais avec le maintien de la distanciation physique, les entreprises ne sont peut-être pas aussi productives qu'avant. et bien des services seront très difficiles à offrir. De plus, la réouverture de l'économie se fait à un rythme différent dans chaque région, secteur et pays. Cette situation va bouleverser les chaînes d'approvisionnement et affecter le volume et les prix des exportations. Le coronavirus pourrait faire baisser l'immigration et donc limiter la croissance de la main-d'œuvre. De manière plus généralisée, certains secteurs ne vont rouvrir que s'il existe un vaccin ou au moins des antiviraux efficaces. Dans ces conditions, la capacité de production de l'économie va subir un choc dont les effets vont persister, même après le déconfinement. On the demand side, consider the millions of Canadians that have either lost their jobs or seen their hours scaled back. This represents a very large drop in spending power across the country. Fortunately, the government's fiscal measures have been scaled to replace the labor income lost throughout the economy, laying the foundation for recovery. But spending has fallen sharply since the pandemic hit, and as Deputy Governor Larry Schembri pointed out in a speech last week, this is not only because there are fewer things to buy, but it's also because there's been a sharp drop in confidence. And until people are back at work and feel more confident, they're going to remain cautious in their spending. It's going to be crucial for us to understand how much supply and demand have been damaged and how they're going to recover in the coming quarters. As the economy reopens, we should see some very strong job growth numbers. We should also see pent-up demand giving a boost to spending. But not everyone's job is coming back, and uncertainty will linger. As a result, we expect the quick rebound of the reopening phase of the recovery will give way to a more gradual recuperation phase with weak demand. If, as we expect, supply is restored more quickly than demand, this could lead to a large gap between the two, putting a lot of downward pressure on inflation. Our main concern is to avoid a persistent drop in inflation by helping Canadians get back to work. Parlons des outils de politique monétaire. En temps normal, pour stimuler ou ralentir l'économie, la banque ajuste le taux de cible de financement à un jour. Ce taux interbancaire n'a généralement pas d'effet immédiat sur les consommateurs, sauf s'ils ont un prêt hypothécaire à taux variable. Mais il se reflète dans les coûts emprunts à plus long terme, c'est-à-dire sur l'horizon qui touche la plupart des emprunteurs, que ce soit les particuliers ou les entreprises. Au début de la pandémie, il était clair que la confiance allait chuter. C'est pourquoi la Banque a vite baissé le taux directeur à 25 points de base. L'objectif immédiat n'était pas vraiment de stimuler les dépenses, mais de soutenir la confiance. Et maintenant que les commerces commencent à rouvrir, les bas taux d'intérêt vont inciter les gens à dépenser. The policy rate is now at its effective lower bound of 25 basis points. Some central banks have taken policy rates below zero. We feel that bringing rates into negative territory could lead to distortions in the behavior of financial institutions. However, we have a number of other tools we can use to help stimulate demand. The bank has launched a series of purchase programs that involve buying different types of assets. We've launched programs to buy Canadian mortgage bonds, commercial paper, bankers' acceptances, corporate bonds, and provincial and federal government debt. We introduced these programs to make sure that key markets were functioning properly and to keep credit flowing. Credit is the lifeblood of modern market-based economies. And during a crisis, it is imperative that central banks maintain access to credit and avoid a credit crunch. When markets aren't functioning properly, the ability for monetary policy to provide the stimulus to provide stimulus also breaks down. But financial markets are now working considerably better. And with this improvement, our asset purchase programs are becoming a source of monetary stimulus. The bank is committed to buying at least $5 billion of Canadian government bonds a week until the recovery is well underway. And these large-scale asset purchases, they're building up. And as they build up, they deliver stimulus through a process that is often called quantitative easing, or QE. Here's how it works. Purchases of government bonds help lower yields. With funding markets now functioning properly, our weekly purchases also make borrowing cheaper for households and businesses. For example, as our purchases lower the yield on 5-year government bonds, this is being reflected in cheaper fixed-rate mortgages. QE can also send a signal that our policy interest rate is likely to remain low for a long period. By giving more certainty about the path of short-term interest rates, this can help lower long-term borrowing costs for both households and businesses. The bank is also buying private assets, including corporate bonds. We started these purchases of corporate bonds because of strains in the corporate bond market. To date, purchases have been limited, but market conditions have improved. This type of program provides stimulus by providing liquidity, helping narrow the difference between corporate and government bond yields. By reducing the premium corporations have to pay relative to governments, we're lowering interest rates for businesses. This is often called credit easing, or CE. At our last interest rate announcement on June 3rd, we indicated that with market functioning improved and containment restrictions easing, our focus is shifting to supporting output and employment. We also reiterated our commitment to continue large-scale asset purchases until the recovery is well underway. With market functioning restored, these purchases are working through more channels to deliver stimulus. Any further policy actions would be calibrated to provide the necessary degree of monetary policy accommodation required to achieve the inflation target. The pandemic has created a fog of uncertainty, and this has greatly complicated our ability to generate a clear outlook for growth and inflation. The course of the coronavirus is the biggest source of uncertainty. Beyond that, we don't know how global trade and supply chains will evolve or what will happen with domestic supply and demand. We don't know how consumer and business confidence will rebound or whether the pandemic will lead to lasting changes in savings and spending habits. L'économie s'étant au moins stabilisée, on y voit un peu plus clair. L'arrivée des nouvelles données va nous donner certaines réponses. Dans le rapport sur la politique monétaire de juillet, on espère donc de fournir un scénario central pour l'évolution de la production et de l'inflation, avec une analyse aux principaux risques autour de ce scénario. On pourra ensuite évaluer les nouvelles informations par rapport à ce scénario. Currently, we expect growth to resume in the third quarter. The economy will get an immediate boost as containment measures are lifted, people are called back to work, and households resume some of their normal activities. But it'll be important not to assume that these growth rates will continue beyond the reopening phase. The pandemic is likely to inflict some lasting damage to demand and supply. The recovery will likely be prolonged and bumpy, with potential setbacks along the way. The message I want to leave you with is that while we're using different tools in these extraordinary times, our policy remains grounded in the same framework. The inflation target is our beacon that's guiding our actions that will help bring the economy from crisis through reopening to recuperation and recovery. And with that, let me stop and open the floor to your questions. I'm looking forward to a good discussion.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Governor. As we move to the Q&A, I would like to introduce the President of the Montreal Canadian Clubs Board of Directors, Madame Marie-Hélène Nollet.
Bonjour, and everyone. I'm very happy to participate to this event today.
Also with us is the President of the Canadian Club Toronto, Bruce Sellery. He's going to kick off the armchair discussion portion of this event. So over to you, Bruce.
Thank you very much. And Governor, I'm so glad to see that we kitted you out with a proper armchair. As a traditional Canadian club event, regardless of where you attended across this country over the past, 120 years, would include a casual and intimate conversation, as our clubs have been for so long interviewing policymakers such as yourself, presidents, prime ministers. And so we want to begin with something that will give us an insight to you as a person. We're going to be listening to your economic forecast for probably something like the next 7 years or so. And we know that you're going to be looking at the same economic indicators as your predecessors. But what would you say informs your world that has you be your own unique human doing a very challenging and important job for our country?
Well, thank you again for having me, and it is a real pleasure to be here. Okay, I don't really like talking about myself. You sure you don't want my detailed explanation of quantitative easing?
But yes, we do want a little bit about you. You got a big job. You got a lot of power. We don't need to know more about you than just the fact that you have a fancy new haircut, which looks great.
Thank you. Okay, so what informs my views? It's very important to get a diversity of perspectives, a diversity of backgrounds, a diversity of views. It's going to be really important that we have the debate, we have the discussion, and we try to drive to a consensus. When I speak as governor, it's going to be grounded in a lot of hard work and analysis by the staff here at the Bank of Canada. It's going to reflect the vibrant discussion around the governing council table. Those are the things that are really going to inform me.
So another one. In what ways are you different than prior governors in style and substance?
Well, I would begin by saying I wouldn't over-personalize it. As I said, I'm going to speak reflecting the analysis of the Bank of Canada and the discussion. I think both Governor Polos and Senior Deputy Carolyn Wilkins have created a leading central bank, and I'm very pleased to build on that. Again, I'm going to be looking for a diversity of views going forward. I think it's going to be very important that the Bank of Canada really understands and responds to the major forces on the Canadian economy. It's going to be very important that we're accountable to Canadians, and it's very important that we're going to be ready for the unexpected.
You mentioned the CPI and the importance of looking at what's in that basket of goods, given how people's spending habits have changed so dramatically. As you look ahead, where do you see spending reverting fairly quickly, and what categories of spending do you see either taking just a little bit longer, or whether there could be a permanent change?
Yes, I mean, as you indicated, we are seeing changes in spending patterns. In fact, we've been working with Statistics Canada on looking at how changing spending patterns are affecting the measurement of inflation. Looking forward, I think as the economy reopens, we are going to see some of those shifts unwind. We're all dying for a haircut. There are a number of things that you're going to see come back pretty quickly. There are other things, though, that activities that involve large numbers of people that aren't going to come back for some time. None of us are going to a rock concert anytime soon. Hospitality, in-person entertainment, air travel, those activities are likely to be slower to come back. There may also be some permanent shifts in spend patterns. As I said in my opening remarks, what we're going to be working on is try to look through the temporary shifts, but embrace and adapt to the more permanent shifts. it's probably too early to get a really good feel on what those permanent shifts are. Just to give you one example, when Apple introduced the iPhone in 2007, there were a number of pretty predictable effects. We were going to do more banking and entertainment on our phones, but I don't think anybody saw Uber coming or Airbnb coming. We're just starting the recovery. We're only a few months into this. There will be some unanticipated longer-term effects. Our job at the Banque du Canada is going to be making sure we understand and adapt to those.
La semaine dernière, vous avez dit devant le comité des finances de la Chambre des communes que vous n'aviez pas l'intention d'augmenter les taux d'intérêt compte tenu de la situation actuelle. Dans quelles circonstances pourriez-vous envisager les augmenter, même avec un taux de chômage supérieur à 8 ou 10
Comme je viens de juste mentionner, nous sommes au début de reprise. Au premier trimestre, le PIB a diminué à peu près 2%. Au deuxième trimestre, c'est chuté. Le niveau est très bas. La reprise sera longue. On anticipe une reprise à au moins deux phases. Une phase de réouvrir, où on peut voir des taux de croissance assez forts. Après, une phase plus longue, plus graduelle, une phase qu'on s'appelle une phase de récupération. La reprise, c'est l'entière de ces deux phases. Donc, ce sera important de donner le support du stimulus monétaire durant cette période. Donc, ce sera une période assez longue avant qu'on commence les discussions autour de retirer le stimulus. Nous avons tous les outils que nous avons besoin quand c'est le temps, mais ce n'est pas une discussion que nous sommes en train d'engager maintenant.
The pandemic has not affected all Canadians equally. In fact, those in lower-paying service-oriented jobs have really borne the brunt of the pain, especially if they're trying to parent at the same time. My 10-year-old is locked away in a nearby room. We still have some empathy for those Canadians who are trying to juggle so many different balls. What would you say the bank needs to do differently for these different segments of the population? Because low interest rates don't help the renter in the same way as they do a homeowner, for example.
Well, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, in recessions, it is typically the most vulnerable members of society that suffer the most. This recession, it's a deep one, and it's certainly no exception. In fact, one of the things, as you alluded to, that we're seeing in this recession is that women are particularly affected for two reasons. One, typically in recessions, services are not as affected as much as manufacturing or construction. In this recession, though, because many services involve close physical proximity to people, they are particularly affected, and women work disproportionately in the service industry. The other reason women are disproportionately affected is that women still do the largest part of childcare and elder care, and schools are closed, summer camps are closed, most activities are closed, daycares are closed in most parts of the country. And so, women are dealing with children at home. They may not be able to work. And I think an important message to employers is they're going to need to be flexible. From the for monetary policy, we can't target individual segments of society, but the best thing we can do is focus on supporting the recovery. Keeping interest rates across the yield curve low so that households and businesses have access to credit at low interest rates. And that should help Canadians get back to work. The best thing we can do is support the recovery. That's going to help all segments of society. I would also say it's not just women. If you look at the latest labor force numbers, youth have been particularly affected. Recent immigrants have been particularly affected. And fiscal policy has been a very, it is the tool that can target different groups, and there have been a series of extraordinary fiscal support programs that are helping these various groups and laying the foundation for recovery.
So Canada is a great, vast, and complicated country. How do you, as the governor, balance the different needs of different industries? Let's use example oil and gas as an example.
It is a vast country. It's a beautiful country. And we have a remarkably diverse economy. That's an asset. We've got a large service sector, we've got an important resource sector, and a significant manufacturing sector. At any one time, different sectors will be growing at different speeds. Certainly for people in our oil-producing regions, before the pandemic hit, Canada was in a very good place. Unemployment was at a 40-year low. Inflation was very close to target. But even then, it wasn't evenly spread across the country. Our oil producer regions were not as strong as the rest of the country. Now, unfortunately, they're facing a double whammy. The coronavirus and the effects that's had on their economy, and a large oil price shock. Fortunately, oil prices, having gone virtually to zero, have now worked their way quite a bit back. This morning, WTI is almost $40. But there's no doubt that the pandemic is going to have an ongoing effect on oil prices. And in fact, the weakness in oil prices could last longer than the pandemic. From a monetary policy perspective, again, we can't target different industries or different regions, but it's very important that we understand what's going on across this vast country. We understand the experience of Canadians in all the regions, and that we take that into account as we design and implement our monetary policies.
The United States faces many uncertainties. The questions around the fall election, their own fight against COVID-19, their approach on post-pandemic reopening, all that stuff. And of course, the U.S. outlook is an enormous risk for us. How will the Bank of Canada navigate that under your leadership?
Well, as you've indicated, the Canadian and U.S. economies are closely linked. What happens in the U.S. economy will have an important impact on Canada. As you indicated, there is a lot going on in the U.S. There's uncertainty around the course of coronavirus itself. Unfortunately, we are seeing rising cases in a number of parts of the United States. There's the economy, how are households, how are consumers going to respond, how are businesses going to respond. There's social unrest. There's an election cycle coming. I don't have any searing insights to offer you on each one of those, but what I can tell you is that we will be assessing the strength of the U.S. recovery. We'll be assessing the evolution of the U.S. recovery very carefully going forward. We will factor that in, and we will be factoring that into our analysis. Clearly, a stronger U.S. recovery would be good for Canada.
So la dette des ménages canadiens est une préoccupation importante pour la Banque du Canada. Selon vous, comment voyez-vous l'endettement actuel des ménages affecter la reprise économique, considérant que l'économie américaine, les consommateurs se sont désendettés énormément au cours des 12 dernières années?
L'endettement des ménages au Canada, comme la Banque a souligné plusieurs fois, est un risque, c'est élevé au Canada. Qu'est-ce qu'on voit à ce moment, c'est que avec les programmes de transferts fiscaux aux ménages, ces programmes sont à peu près compensés pour la réduction en revenus que les ménages ont à cause de crise. Et les ménages ont réduit les dépenses parce qu'il y a moins à acheter et aussi ils ont l'incertitude autour de leur job. Et donc, pour ces deux raisons, qu'est-ce qu'on voit maintenant? C'est le taux d'épargne a augmenté. Plusieurs ménages sont en train de réduire leurs dettes et donc le taux de croissance du crédit des ménages a beaucoup diminué. Donc, ça crée une fondation pour une reprise. Et durant cette reprise, c'est clair que le rôle du Banque du Canada, sera de donner le stimulus nécessaire pour supporter cette reprise, pour encourager les ménages de dépenser. Mais ce serait important que les ménages avec des très hautes dettes ne sont pas les ménages qui prennent plus de dettes. Avec des mesures macroprudentielles, le gouvernement et différentes agences de le gouvernement ont mis quelques politiques en place pour limiter que les ménages avec les plus hautes dettes sont les ménages qui dépensent encore plus. Donc, ça serait important durant cette reprise de ne pas exacerber ces risques.
I want to ask you about economic indicators. You referenced in your opening remarks that there will be setbacks. Of course, there will be setbacks. How will you be able to tell what is the equivalent of a flat tire versus what is actually a blown piston when it comes to the Canadian economy?
Okay, I get my car metaphors out. You're right that we are in a situation of unprecedented uncertainty. There's a lot of things we don't know. I mean, the biggest thing we don't know is the course of the coronavirus itself. We also don't know how much damage there is to the economy. What we do know is that typically very deep recessions, and we have a very deep recession, cause more lasting damage. And what we're expecting is as the economy reopens, as the containment restrictions are being lifted, we'll probably see a pretty good bounce. We're probably going to see some pretty good job growth numbers, some pretty good growth in GDP through the third quarter. After we get through that initial period, that reopening period, that's probably when we're going to start to get a sense of how much damage there really is. How much, is it just a flat tire or is the transmission busted and it's going to be a bigger repair job? When we think of the recovery, we think of it including both this reopening phase and this slower, more gradual recuperation phase where, we've got to repair the car. And it's going to be important for monetary policy to provide the support that the economy needs through both stages.
Vous avez présidé le groupe d'experts sur la finance durable dont le rapport a été déposé l'année dernière. Pouvez-vous nous donner un ou deux exemples spécifiques de la manière dont vous comptez intégrer ces idées dans le travail de la Banque du Canada? Et y aura-t-il des obstacles à l'implantation selon vous?
C'est clair que le changement du climat avance de plus en plus vite et toutes les institutions devront accélérer leur travail sur ce sujet et ça inclut la Banque du Canada. Quelques exemples. Un exemple, c'est de faire des scénarios. Que sont les scénarios pour l'économie canadienne autour de la transition d'une croissance plus verte? Que sont les scénarios pour le secteur financier quand il y a des changements des prix des actifs à cause du changement climatique? Que sont les scénarios pour le secteur financier? Ce sera très important pour nous à la Banque de comprendre les effets du changement climatique sur l'économie canadienne. Et ça sera très important pour aussi le secteur privé de comprendre. Parce que vraiment, c'est le secteur privé qui vraiment devrait ajuster. C'est eux qui créent les émissions et c'est eux qui devraient ajuster et ces scénarios pour aider en ce processus.
I want to ask you about what is happening for Canada's chartered banks right now, because certainly there is anecdotal evidence that they are being more conservative in their lending. What would you say are the mechanisms through which the Bank of Canada can ensure that the commercial banks are lending beyond just these rock bottom interest rates?
That's been a very important focus of the Bank of Canada's policy. If you go back to March and April, with the sudden arrival of the coronavirus and a dramatic pivot in people's economic expectations, we saw severe strains, freezing in a number of core credit markets. And that's why the Bank of Canada came in with a number of purchase programs to provide the liquidity that the system needed to keep credit flowing. So what you're seeing, banks through this crisis, unlike the last crisis when they were the problem, this crisis, they're a big part of the solution. Banks are an important shock absorber. They're deferring mortgages for households. They're providing businesses loans to bridge them to the other side of it. But in order to do that, they have to be able to fund those loans. And a critical function of the central bank is to make sure that the system has the liquidity so that the banking system can get access to funding so that they can do that. And the good news is that with these programs and I think the economy having stabilized, we are seeing much improved conditions in financial markets. Some of our shorter-term programs we are now scaling back as markets normalize. And to bring it back to monetary policy, with that normalization, the stimulus that we're providing, the monetary stimulus that we're providing to the system is starting to flow through more channels and support the recovery.
Vous étiez en Bourse lors de la dernière crise financière en 2008. En quoi, selon vous, la relance sera-t-elle différente cette fois-ci?
Comme j'ai mentionné, les différences très importantes en ces crises. En 2008, c'était une crise financière. C'était les banques, les institutions financières, surtout aux États-Unis, en Europe, qui c'était le problème. Et le résultat, c'est une contraction très forte de crédit et l'effet, c'était une récession très sérieuse. Cette fois-ci, ce n'est pas les institutions financières qui sont le problème, c'est une crise de santé, une crise, c'est une medical crisis. Et comme j'ai mentionné, le secteur financier est une partie de la solution. The financial sector can be an important shock absorber, helping households and businesses get to the other side of this. Having said that, there are certain lessons that crises have in common. I have something I call the 7 C's of crisis leadership, and I'm not going to go through all 7, but I'll just give you a couple. The first is contingency planning. It's better if it starts well before a crisis, but even once a crisis starts, you often have a bit of a recovery window. It's really important that you use that period to plan for what else could go wrong and make sure you've got fully executable plans to address it. The second principle is what I call crush it. When you've got a real crisis, you need to step beyond the normal responses and really embrace the idea that you need to overwhelm this crisis. And I think in Canada, both the government and the Bank of Canada have really embraced that, rolling out unprecedented, extraordinary programs to build a bridge, to put a floor under this crisis and help Canadians get through it. Another element I would highlight is the importance of cooperation and communication. Monetary policy is playing a very important complementary role to fiscal policy. Monetary and fiscal policy, together with OSFI and other agencies are working closely together within their mandates to support the recovery. We also need international cooperation, and we could use a little more international cooperation going forward.
I think the hashtag is going to be hashtag crush it, Governor, and there may be t-shirts, so we'll watch on that front. We're getting a whole bunch of great questions from our audience today, and I want to include one on real estate. And it's kind of a follow-on to your comments on household debt, but this is a massive, massive asset on the net worth statements for so many Canadians across this country. How much risk does that represent?
Well, real estate has a lot of different parts to it. There's houses, there's commercial real estate, there's warehouses. So far what I can tell you is we're seeing quite differential effects. So, for example, warehouses, we're seeing quite strong demand. We're all shopping, we're all using e-commerce more. So those fulfillment centers, those warehouses, there's strong demand for those. Commercial real estate, clearly there's a lot of uncertainty. I think we're all looking forward to getting back to work, but work's probably going to look different. And what is that going to look like? Parts of the retail sector are being particularly affected, malls, for example. And with respect to housing, we've seen, not surprisingly, with the containment restrictions, sharp drops in activity. But so far, we haven't, housing prices have been relatively stable. We will certainly be watching very closely and, feeding all that into our assessment of the recovery. I do expect the different parts of the real estate market will be affected quite differently going forward. So it's going to be important to understand that.
Another great question is, beyond recovery from COVID-19, what is your longer-term vision for the Bank of Canada? Where will be the bank in 7 years from now?
Well, as a new governor, I'm very conscious that I am the steward of the Bank of Canada. And like the governors that have come before me, I want to leave it in better shape than I found it. As I mentioned at the outset, under Governor Polas and Senior Deputy Governor Wilkins, they built the Bank of Canada into a leading central bank, so I'm starting from a very good place. As I look forward, what I am really struck by is the pace of change is accelerating. Markets are accelerating, the pace of technological change is accelerating, climate change is accelerating. And to be frank, societies around the world are having trouble keeping up with this faster rate of change. For a central bank, it's going to be very important that we keep up, that we actually get ahead of it, that we really understand the major forces on the Canadian economy. We respond to them. We're accountable to Canadians, and we're prepared for the unknowns. I think it's going to be very important that we're flexible in the application of our policies, we're agile, we're innovative, and we're resolute. And the other element is we're going to need to be more diverse and more inclusive in every dimension, both inside and outside the bank.
I want to ask you about the potential for a second wave of the coronavirus. We're starting to see that in some parts of the country. It is very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle, and Canadians have now experienced some freedom in certain geographies. How do you factor in the risk of a second wave into your forecasts?
The outlook is fraught with uncertainty, and the biggest one is the course of the coronavirus. I think the key here is there are going to be outbreaks as the economy reopens. We're seeing this around the world. The key is going to be responding quickly and trying to contain those. What does that mean? It means, we're going to need good contact tracing. We're going to need a lot of testing. And the hope is that we've learned a lot and we can do a much better job of shutting down things in much more locally. If we can't do that, you're right, we're going to have to get back to broad-based containment, and that will be a very large setback. Companies need to be, we're going to need to use all our ingenuity in how to get people back to work safely, how to serve customers safely, so we minimize the probability of a second wave and respreading of the virus. And when that does occur, we're going to have to respond quickly and in a targeted manner to really try to prevent its spread.
I will say last question to Marie-Hélène. We're almost at our time.
Governor, we only have a few minutes left. Bruce and I would like to give you the last word. It could be something we didn't touch on, a call to action, or simply hope. So what would be your last word?
My last word is we're going to get through this. Canadians are resourceful. Our business community is got lots of ingenuity, and I think policymakers are being innovative and they are resolute. But it's going to be a long, slow recovery. There are going to be setbacks. We have seen a precipitous drop in economic activity, and while we're expecting, we're optimistic that there'll be a good rebound. We've avoided the worst scenario. Not all jobs are coming back. It's going to take some time. And my commitment as Governor of the Bank of Canada is that we are laser focused on supporting this recovery. And the inflation target is our beacon. We're going to be guiding policy to keep inflation on target. And to do that, we need to support the recovery and get Canadians back to work. Thank you.
Governor, I would like to thank you for your remarks and for taking the time to answer so many good questions. I wish you the very best in your new position. As conclusion, I would like to introduce the co-chair of the Canadian Club of Calgary Speakers Committee, Mrs. Susan Joliffe.
Hello, how are you? Thank you very much, Governor Macklem, for your time and your optimistic report to us today. I'd also like to thank everybody for participating in this live event. I'd like to send a special thank you to the team at the Bank of Canada who have worked so hard to make this important address happen. This presentation was a partnership between the many different Canadian Clubs of Canada, and we thank all of you for viewing and being part of our Coast to Coast to Coast presentation. You will be able to view this video later today on the Bank of Canada's website. Please feel free to share it with everyone. And happily wrapping up today, thank you again for being with us on our online presentation with the Canadian Clubs, and have a safe and wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Governor.